All right, so this is the pastor, Joey Svensson.
And this is the pastor's older brother.
And this is the new guest and Hillary supporter, Robbie.
And this is Jack Hoy, the Hillary skeptic.
All right, and this is the pastor with no answers. And Jared, I am actually looking forward to if you think about it, we've had Jack on many times, but we had him on for episode 40 in which we talked about Trump. Now, Jack played the role. Well, Jack was the person who was a Trump skeptic as well, but I wonder if we'll be able to decipher which episode he's more passionate about.
Yeah, that would be interesting.
Like if we can get Jack heated tonight, then I think that says something, because he was pretty even keel last time around. So
yeah, for sure.
Robbie, tell everybody a little bit about yourself. What kind of company you work at, and you're a friend of Dan Koch, right?
I am. That's how you found me. I've known Dan Koch since I was 4 years old.
Nice. Was it a good relationship all these years?
It was great. It wasn't as great.
Yeah, awesome. And you are a politics fanatic, right? You told me you're constantly reading, constantly researching, and
yeah, I got into politics when I was or reading about politics when I was like 16, so about almost 20 years ago. And I would estimate that I read legitimately 1 million words a year of politics coverage.
Yeah.
I make an effort to read from across the spectrum. I know a lot of folks fall in the trap of reading just like only conservative media, but I read mainstream media. I read hyper-conservative blogs that I agree with not at all. I read, something that leans left, leans a little right, things that kind of follow my personal point of view sometimes. I'm kind of like progressive, but also have kind of this like sometimes compassionate conservative bend.
Yeah.
So it's like moderate-ish, but it depends on the subject area. So I kind of read everything and consume this stuff like ravenously.
Yeah, gotcha.
So are you the kind of person that could vote Republican, that could vote Democrat, depending on the person?
Yeah, so I have voted Democrat in the last couple elections, but I have voted in the Republican primary 2 of the past 3 elections. So
Okay.
I give a great deal of thought to what I vote for, and you could easily put me in either camp depending on the issue. So I try to consume it all and think about all the candidates, not just my party's candidate.
Gotcha.
So are you like a hardcore chauvinist?
No, I am not.
So we want to welcome you to Pastor with No Answers as a first-time guest, and just to, I guess, a reminder to our whole audience. Our goal here is really to have a conversation. Even though most of our guests can't help but to get a little debate oriented, and that's fine. It's mainly to have a discussion like we're hanging out and having a beer together and just talking. So laid back, and we always have a good bit of fun. So thanks for being here. So I want to dive right in. So Robbie, I'm surprised that there's any Trump or Hillary supporters on the face of the earth. So I am actually extremely intrigued, and I don't mean that in any sort of insult. I already respect you from just a little bit of time I've had you on the phone and had you on here, but I'm just, man, both of our candidates, I just can't believe who they are. And if we had a third party that could just get some momentum, man, that would be so awesome. So let's just start. Let's let you kind of have the floor since you're the Hillary supporter. Well, Jared, you're big time Hillary, right?
No.
So Robbie, let's let you have the floor and give us a snapshot of why you're on board with a Hillary presidential run here.
Yeah. Well, and someday maybe we'll have a follow-up pod on how we got to Trump plus Hillary, which is a fascinating combination of pretty deep dive stuff on media and party politics. But that's not for today. Today is about the candidates. Sure. So I'll run for a little bit here, and I wanted to kind of preface by saying I think that it's important to define the job of the president, right? Like we're saying, why support her for president? Well, what does a president do? And so I was thinking about this, and there's sort of 3 things I think that the job falls under in descending order. First, this is the commander-in-chief. In times of crisis, they have to make decisions in a calm, informed manner with the council of experts to come to the right conclusion. 2, a really important job of the president that we also often forget about is the figurehead of the state. When there's pain after, Sandy Hook or 9/11, the president's almost a shoulder to cry on for the country.
Yeah.
At the same time, in times of need, like, so we have to go into Afghanistan and hit back at the guys who did 9/11. Can someone be strong? So compassionate, but also strength. And the last thing is like the typical thing we debate, which is like policy, which is kind of my wheelhouse really, is like they're sitting or at least working on, foreign policy, tax policy, whatever. But oddly enough, the most compelling case I think for Hillary is those first two things that normally are kind of a given. Like normally we believe our candidates are calm, rational actors in times of crisis, be it, Romney or Obama or McCain or Bush or Kerry, whatever. But in this case, I firmly believe that Hillary Clinton would be phenomenal in times of crisis. She can make calm, informed decisions. She's done it before. I feel she's the only candidate who can do that. And this of these two. On the second point of being a figurehead in times of need, when the country's in pain or needs a leader who can be strong.
Yeah.
I think that she's demonstrated she can be a compassionate, listening person who can empathize with the needs of her citizens, even if she does not agree with them. And also, she can be tough. She, was Secretary of State during the Iraq and Afghanistan affairs. She was in the sit room during the killing of bin Laden. So she can be a tough cookie, but also a shoulder to cry on.
And
I think,
her husband's affairs. I mean, she can.
Yeah, there you go. Which is like, I think sometimes to sidetrack a bit, like, I don't want to hold her husband's, affairs against her. That's not her fault, right? There's a whole debate on like, should she have left him or not? I don't want to have that debate. But I think that she could be that figurehead leader who can be. I mean, she's very strong. I mean, she's taken some punches on the chin for the last 20 years, and she's still standing. But those who know her say her strongest characteristic is her willingness to listen, to be that mother. I mean, her book is called "It Takes a Village" about parenting. Yeah. And then last, I like her on policy, and that's again my normal wheelhouse. Like, I think her tax policy is better. I think her foreign policy is much better because I'm somewhat, frankly, terrified of Trump's. But oddly enough, like, the fundamental fitness for office is, in this case, and it's a rare case, the primary argument. Like, I think we only have one candidate personally who could be commander in chief and who could be an effective, functional leader for all Americans once in office.
Yeah. So I didn't ask you to prepare for these questions. So if you want to pass on any of them, feel free. Do you have in your mind a greatest president ever?
Yeah, I think Abraham Lincoln's the best president of all time. I think it's kind of an open and shut case, if I can be kind of like given a hot take.
Yeah.
My other sort of short list would include Washington, FDR, and Teddy Roosevelt.
All right, so let's put Abe Lincoln at 10, and let's put Donald Trump as 2016 winner at 1. Where would you put Obama? Abraham Lincoln's a 10, Trump's a 1. What about Obama?
I don't know. I personally think that Obama. So I agree with Obama on policy on a lot of things. I know that not all your listeners will. If we can get into the ins and outs of healthcare policy, whatever. There's no denying that this has been a somewhat divided period of time, which is somewhat his fault, but also somewhat just general polarization, media structure, or whatever. I'll give him a solid 6.5, 7. I mean, he's going to leave office with a high 50s approval rating during a very polarized time, and I think that look back in 20 years, he'll be viewed pretty favorably. I mean, I think he'll be the liberal Reagan, put it that way. Like, he will be looked upon very fondly by liberals in the future. Obviously, not everyone will love him, but I think he's been a very effective president at achieving his goals. Not all good. We'll see what history looks back on him as.
Yeah. All right. Well, let me ask the same question about Reagan. And this is really just to give our listeners context of just kind of, your explanations are great. It just gives them more insight into you and where you're coming from.
Right. So I gave Obama a 6.5, maybe up to a 7.5 with history.
Right. Yeah.
I would give Reagan that 7.5 now, maybe 8.5. I mean, I think that Reagan, like, frankly, I think if you transported Hillary and Trump back into the 80s, like, Hillary has more in common with Reagan than Trump does on policy, on tone, on a lot of things. So, I think you can actually like Reagan and like Obama both. You don't have to dislike one of them. Obviously, he lived in a different time. Yeah. And the challenge of his time was the Soviet Union, and he was successful in negotiating or navigating the Cold War. And he did so while being a compassionate conservative. There are things we look back upon now that he would not have looked good in a modern context. You know, the way they approached domestic trouble, like the early era of the war on drugs, the way they responded to AIDS, things like that. But
Yeah.
on balance, in the 80s, he did a darn good job, I think.
Awesome. Jack, you wanna rate those two or a pass on that?
Well, no, sure. Well, I think your assessment of Reagan is very fair. You know, see, I would rate Obama as close to 1 as you could get because he's wrong on everything. You know, the thing about Reagan is Reagan had a worldview. He understood the way that the economy worked, and he took office at a time when the economy was actually at least as bad as the Obama economy, and did an incredible job. And because I lived during that time, what I remember is all the pundits who were talking before the election about is the presidency just really gotten too big for one person to do it? Is it really impossible now? And he changed that whole perception. You know, Obama has been a disaster in economic policy. He's been a disaster in foreign policy. You know, good man, honorable man, smart man, but he's wrong on everything. I mean, his worldview is wrong. He doesn't seem to understand that people will respond to what you do, that they're not, that you can't just say, I want you to do this and therefore you'll do it. So, like, denial of economic reality, it's like, you know, the old story about King Canute commanding the tide not to come in, right? And all of his couriers saying, oh, sure, King, the tide will do whatever you want. And it doesn't, you know. So, you know, he's been trying to order the tide not to come in on economics, and it's been coming in all the same. So, you know, we have a situation where we have profound depression about the future of our country because you got a lot of people who have grown up with, you know, nothing else than this guy's incompetence and then, you know, the failure of the Bush administration before that. So, I have a very low opinion of Obama, and I realize that's something people disagree on, but I just find it hard to imagine that you can point to anything he's done well. He's implemented his agenda, and the other thing I think about him is he's done immense damage to our institutions.
Jared, how do you feel about those two candidates?
The 2 candidates?
Yeah.
Clinton and
Presidents.
Presidents.
Oh.
Hey, you didn't hear they're running? I mean, Reagan came back.
Yeah, I mean,
They would both win like 500 electoral votes if they did.
right. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, honestly have not been following politics for a long time. So as far as, Obama's administration, I don't know that much about it. With Reagan, I guess I would say from what I've read in the history books, I guess his policies helped us win the Cold War. He seemed like he helped us, keep the peace, at least in the sense of nuclear annihilation.
He survived an assassination attempt. I mean, how badass is that?
Well, yeah, but I mean, also it seems like we had the stagflation of Carter, and he got us out of that. Double-digit unemployment, double-digit inflation. He got us out of that with his policies. The one thing I guess I don't like is the fact that we started running
movies,
massive amounts of deficits.
Yeah.
So, or high deficits during his administration. So I don't know. I mean, I guess I would personally say, based on my very limited knowledge, that Reagan was a better president.
Yeah. All right. So thank
you
guys.
A lot of those things. Well,
go ahead.
One thing to note with that. So I'm an econ major in college, and I was actually working at a big investment shop when the economy collapsed, and like a lot of this fixing stagflation or like the growth rates after a person comes in office are really not good or bad their fault or their success, right? And so, and I would,
a lot of it's time.
You don't have to relitigate the economic era of Obama. I would disagree on his policy and stuff, but like, Reagan didn't fix stagflation by himself either. Like sometimes just time is the cure.
Yeah,
Okay.
but not true, because he radically changed tax policy and he supported what Volcker had to do at the Fed in order to strangle inflation. And that was not a politically popular thing. I bought my first house during that era, and I had a 15 3/4% interest rate.
Dang.
That was where the way things were then. I mean, so to say that that was just timing, no, it wasn't. That's not the case there.
No, I'm not saying just timing. I'm saying there's always context, right?
There's
always
no question.
context.
No question.
All right, nice. I enjoyed that. Good context where everybody's kind of at with two big time presidents in our history. Well, Obama not quite history, but so let's move on to Hillary Clinton. Jack, you've heard what Robbie said, and so yeah, I'll kind of give you a stab at making your own opinions known and also addressing some of what Robbie said.
Yeah.
Well,
go ahead.
sorry, can I interrupt?
Please.
Sorry, jump
Please.
in. I want to hear your take, but I sort of said like, here's my job description. Do you agree with even that? Like, what the job of the president is?
Here's what I would say.
Because
I like your framework. I think there's one key thing missing that encompasses all three, and
Sure.
that is the president has to be a great communicator. So,
That's fair.
So, for example, I would say George Bush was a decent commander-in-chief, didn't do well with the figurehead part, was, kind of up and down in policy. I don't think he really, I think it'd be hard-pressed to say that he had a great grasp of policy. But the thing he failed miserably at was communication.
Are you sure that you just didn't
Which Bush?
underestimate him?
W. And I would say his
Okay.
dad wasn't a great communicator either. Reagan was a great communicator. Clinton, in his own way, was a great communicator. He had the ability to connect with people on the things that he was trying to advocate. I don't think she's a great communicator. And, it's like, again, you look at the struggle she's having during the campaign. I mean, she's pretty wooden out there. She's not your point about her empathetic. I mean, your figurehead thing, the way I would frame it is, I like the way that you put that. Like the president has to be able to project toughness when toughness is needed. They've got to be able to project empathy when empathy is needed, when there's a tragedy going on. The way I would frame the way you integrate those two is they need to be able to express themselves authentically. And if there's a less authentic person on the planet than Hillary Clinton, I don't know who it is. Now, again, that's my perception. I think it's the perception of the overwhelming, majority of the American people, and maybe you see that differently. But I think that every word that comes out of her mouth is a lie.
All right,
She's a liar. She lies. That's always her immediate right. Even like getting sick last weekend, she's got to lie about that. I mean, she lies about everything. Commander-in-Chief.
What did she say about her sickness? I'm curious. I don't keep up with anything. What'd she say?
She was overheated. That was their deal. She was overheated, and then what happened was the footage came out that showed they had to basically carry her into the van or whatever it was, and then they finally acknowledged after X period of time that she had been diagnosed with pneumonia. Now again, her reflex is always to lie, and she lies about everything. That she lies to her own advantage all the time.
Now, why does somebody? Let's just assume for a second that you're right about this. Why does someone that is scrutinized as much as her? Why wouldn't she know better? Just don't lie. Well, everybody's going to know.
The Clintons have been very successful liars, right? I mean, and they're very good at it. Both of them are remarkably good at it.
They're remarkably good liars.
They are. They are.
I mean, obviously, Robbie, I want you to respond to that. I mean, what do you say to that?
So I'm glad to jump into the question of trustworthiness of her and both candidates if you want. I also don't want to rob Jack of his early sort of preamble either.
Well, the thing is, my kind of thing is, I think Trump's a disgusting person too. And I'm not trying to say that. I wouldn't even argue that she's worse necessarily. I don't know that.
Right.
I mean, I think that would be an interesting contest. But
yeah, well, and there's a whole debate of like, I heard your Trump one, and I said, I know you're planning on writing someone, and like, I'm firmly of the belief that you should pick one of the candidates if one is even incrementally better. That's a whole different debate.
Yeah, understand. And you may be right on that. I mean, that's one, as I think I said in that last debate. I'm not proud of my decision, like to not vote for either of the two candidates. But
right. So I can take the trustworthy question. And I'm gonna have some nuance here, and it's not spin.
Please.
Okay, so
yeah, that's good.
So I think it's important to distinguish between trustworthiness, what that means, right? So does it mean being forthright and forthcoming? Does it mean doing what you promise you're going to say? And does it mean like, can I entrust you with a thing of value? I think it's totally fair to say that she has certainly had not been forthcoming. So like the pneumonia thing, you had to sort of pull it out of her. And I don't like that about the Clintons. I think that there's, you asked earlier, Mr. Pastor, about the question of like, if you know you're under scrutiny, like why not share these things? Well, for the last 25 years, like look what happens when they share bad news. They just get obliterated for it by the conservative media machine. And like whether it's fair or not, like I can see why they built up this primary resistance to sharing information. And I don't like it. But that's how it is.
Yeah,
but there's a key distinction, I think. Oh, sorry, just to finish the thought, like between trustworthiness of like being forthcoming and like, am I going to violate your trust and like not do what I promised that I'll do? That I think is a very different question.
Yeah, I guess what I meant by that, and this is definitely some naive Joey talking, because I'm not as into politics, but it just seems like it makes it worse for her, because if it's as clear as Jack's making it out to be, then it just makes her look horrible because people know she's lying.
Well, it makes it worse if it comes out, right? Like, I mean, so she's got pneumonia. She's traveling all over the country, staying in hotels for 6 months. Her doctor says, take these antibiotics, better in 4 days, right? So they have a decision. Do I share this? I make a big brouhaha. So then this conspiracy theory that she's got like Parkinson's or she's dying. Do I feed into that conspiracy wing, or just go back to work and just keep to myself, right? Yeah. And if she hadn't had the overheating episode on a muggy day in New York, we wouldn't know about this. So that's why. Like, I'm sure there are things they've not disclosed before that they successfully didn't have come out because they weren't that big of a deal. The problem is they over-bias towards that, and I'm glad to give that as one of the critiques that I have of them, is they are more willing to keep things private than they should be. That's not unique among these candidates, for sure. She's actually, in some remarkable way, more transparent than Trump, despite that being one of her flaws. But it's certainly a fair criticism, I think.
Can I ask a follow-up question on that, Rob?
Yeah. Yes.
You know, I understand the argument about the, you know, how much do you share about private stuff? How, you know, but you know, tell me your take on the emails. Now, you know, it seems to me that it's been demonstrated pretty conclusively that she lied at every different stage about this whole email deal. Now, you know, I've realized different people have different views on how important, you know, kind of like the transgression itself was.
Right.
But, you know, that seems to me to be a little different, because now you're talking about something that really was a function of how she was doing her work as the Secretary of State.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think for the same reasons before, I think she would, obviously any politician would want to keep something like that to be as small of an issue as possible, right? So the hesitancy makes sense. How do I view the email scandal? I didn't read the blow-by-blow. I'm certainly informed enough on it. I do think it's been blown out of proportion, to your point of like how big it is, and that's why I didn't spend half my life reading about it. But yeah, like, look, she could have been more forthcoming. I think in general, like, the email thing wasn't great. It wasn't a good look. If she'd come out and said everything on day one, would their response have been any different? I don't really know. And I don't view that as disqualifying, and that sounds like a cop-out, but like, to me, that's the same kind of behavior as anybody in that position would be in. And I know that folks don't want like another same old candidate, but like, she's a public servant for the last 30 years, and I feel like, you know, being sort of like, you're going to have to draw it out of me, and I'm going to frame things in the most favorable light possible. And even then, like, on the emails, like, it's a question of like whether or not she really did know if they were confidential, because they only marked this little letter C, like half it on the page. Like, so, you know.
Two things. As somebody who's had a security clearance, she knows better than that. Because the problem is that when you're Secretary of State, there are things that you know that are classified. And when they come out of your mouth, or when they come out when you type them, they become classified immediately. It doesn't matter if they're marked. And anybody who has a security clearance knows that. So,
yeah, but even then, like, the emails in question came to her, not from her, right? And the thing that I look at is
the ones that we've seen anyway. Okay.
They've all been released now. And even the Comey report last week said, like, those are the only three. The only three emails in question were the ones that had the little C mark half it on the page that came in her inbox. And as someone that gets 500 emails a day, I have some empathy. Like, I mean, they can't text, right? So, like, does she even read all 1,000 emails? I'm not trying to make excuses. Like, it's worth discussing. But, you know, okay, I do feel it's up a little bit.
Well, yeah, I would just say two things. I mean, first of all, I think it's, from what I've read, it's a little more egregious than that. But, you know, that's not even the most important point. The important point to me is she was selling access. And every public servant in U.S. history who's done that at that level before has gone to prison for it. She was selling access. I don't see how there's any way you could conclude anything else.
So we're talking foundation now. We're not
exactly.
talking about...
Well, the emails, in my mind, the whole deal was so that she could hide all the foundation stuff. That was the primary, not the only thing she wanted to hide probably, but that was the primary thing.
I don't think it's fair to conflate those two things. But like the Clinton Foundation has released every donor it's ever had because of its nonprofit status, and I don't buy the argument that she was selling access. I think that she was selling celebrity. That Bill was selling celebrity. I mean, there's a reason that Muhammad Ali gets paid $500,000 back before he became enabled to do so for a speaking engagement, just like Bill Clinton does. People want to be around famous people, and it's not a surprise to me that rich, important oligarchs in the Middle East would want to hang out with Bill Clinton, and simultaneously the countries they run are our allies, and they buy weapons from us the same way every ally has for a century.
Okay, but again, you've got all these email exchanges that talk about how so-and-so just contributed so much to the foundation and wants a private meeting with the secretary, and that most of the meetings that she had that were with, I'm trying to think of the boundary around the scheduling. Most of the meetings she had in that category were with foundation donors. Most. So, and the people argue, well, there was no quid pro quo. Well, access is the quid pro quo.
So two things. One is there's no evidence of, like, the access has value. I'll not deny that, but the access has value because presumably something happens beyond that, and there's no evidence of that second step happening. And secondly, the reporting on the meetings that the AP did was very flawed, and they had to correct it. Yes, many meetings were with donors, but 85% of the people were state officials for their countries. So in her official capacity, like, the fact that someone donates to her charity while happening to be like the head of some state, like, of course she meets with them. That's her job. And so, like, I give money to my coworkers' charity runs all the time. Does that mean that we're having some kind of, like, because our charity and our business mix, it's like some kind of improper behavior? I mean, I just feel like, I'll put it this way. They're under such scrutiny, and there is an entire media apparatus built to destroy the Clintons, for better or for worse. If there were a smoking gun, we'd see it. And yet all we see are circumstantial alignment of
all we see is circumstantial evidence, and there is so much of it. So, I mean, I hear you. I think I understand your interpretation. It's a more innocent interpretation than I would make, but I understand what you're saying.
Jared,
well,
Jared, did you put extra butter on your
popcorn? When I say innocent,
or?
I didn't mean that negatively, by the way. It was more of a, you're interpreting it in more of a favorable light is what I meant. I didn't mean that. I hope that didn't come across the wrong.
No, you guys are doing a great job. All right, well, let's stick with the lies then. And can I
actually tell you?
I thought I was an advocate here. Not
I don't think she's very smart. It's interesting. They talk about how experienced and knowledgeable she is. First of all, the leading thing with the Benghazi issue to me is nobody could make a decision. There's always wanting more information. She's very cautious. I've never seen her in a mode where she had to make a decision. I think that's I can understand why everybody would hope that would be true. She certainly tries to project that. I've never seen any evidence of that. I've never seen her be successful at anything. I would say her best stint in public office was her term in the Senate, where by all accounts she was a good first-term senator. And it's tough there because first-term senators, just the way the Senate is structured, it's hard for them to have much of an impact. So I have no criticism about her work in the Senate. It's hard to say that she was an effective Secretary of State. Of course, you could say the guy she was working for is more responsible for policy and she was more the executor. Okay. But it didn't seem like she added anything of value there. So here's my deal. I think she is an incredibly diligent, hardworking person. I think she's a very serious person. I think she cares deeply about what, she's trying to do. Nobody is going to outwork her. I don't think she's very bright. So, like, she went to Yale Law School and was, I don't think she was first in her class, but she was near the top of her class, and then failed the bar exam. That to me, classic indicator of extremely hardworking person who's not very bright. And I've seen nothing in her, since then to change that view. I remember once talking to a guy, an older professor, and talking about students, and his kind of deal was PhDs are generally not the smartest students. They're just the ones with the highest capacity for drudgery.
That's me.
And that's kind of what I think about with her. She's got a high capacity for drudgery. I've never seen her with an insight.
So, Jack, what would you make of the experience that she does have? So let's just say she's not a bright woman. Well, she's had a lot of experience now. Can she utilize that?
Well, sure. And obviously that's the hope. I mean, she's conversant with foreign policy. Nobody's, she's not wondering what Aleppo is, and right. I mean, and Trump, of course, is just seems to revel in his own ignorance. She's certainly not ignorant. She's well informed. You would hope that she would apply good judgment. It's just hard for me to see any evidence that she's got good judgment to apply.
Well, I'll jump in here. So we're just going to have to agree to disagree on her not being intelligent, because I disagree violently with that contention.
I'm not saying she's a moron. I'm just saying she's a very average intelligence.
I've had friends, people who went through Stanford Law School in less time than they should have, who've worked in her campaigns and said that she is whip smart. And you're right that even if not whip smart, the next best thing is preparedness. And even on her tenure as Secretary of State, I disagree that she was ineffective. I mean, I pulled some quotes last night. Lindsey Graham, who's not in her party, said she was, quote, one of the most effective Secretaries of State that I've known in my lifetime. And Paul Ryan, the Speaker of the House, said if she were president right now, not Secretary of State, she and I would have fixed the budget by now. Like, she had tremendous respect of her opponents. Like, so I think that we've forgotten all this in the campaign era, but she was, looking at the approval ratings and her co-senators loved her when she was running things.
She was popular in the Senate, no question. Tell me what you would point to in terms of foreign policy achievements. Maybe it was the reset with Russia. Maybe it was the way she cleaned up the Middle East. I mean, what would you point to?
As you yourself mentioned last time, I think that pointing the fact that there's trouble in the Middle East as a failure of anybody, any administration, is completely unfair, right? Because they've been at war since Abraham.
I would agree. That was unduly snarky. I withdraw.
I think she's done a phenomenal job of, improving our standing in the world. Like, I don't want to get into like the Bush hate fest, because that people don't like when we blame Bush for things. But like when he left office, our standing in Europe and in Far East and Japan, South Korea was at an all-time low. And right now it's much, much improved. I think that she's done a great job strengthening ties to the NATO states and to Far East. Obviously, Russia has all kinds of issues, like it's about to collapse economically, and they're starting, sort of proxy wars around themselves, and the reset too. But again, like, I don't feel like looking at a civil war in Syria is an appropriate measure of her time as Secretary of State. She went to more countries than anyone in history, and in general, and like I personally, so we're probably going to disagree on this one. I like the Iran deal. I think that selling the possibility of becoming the next South Korea to Iran and betting on a free market and an economy, making the people of that country more willing to throw off their sort of religious-based leadership, is probably going to work. I know some folks hate that deal because it opens the door that if it fails, they have more freedoms. I'm betting on freedom working. So I think that's an example that is a success. And it's hard success, and we won't even know for 20 years. But she was there at the negotiating table, working that kind of stuff. And, you mentioned not making quick decisions. There's a famous anecdote. The night that we killed bin Laden was the night of the famous White House Correspondents' Dinner, the black tie, kind of like everyone has a good laugh thing. And she's in the sit room with the president and like the head Joint Chiefs. And someone said, maybe we shouldn't do this tonight. It's already kind of a tough call to make in the first place. And if we're not at this gala, people will get suspicious. And Hillary stands up and says, I can't swear on your podcast, but says, F the dinner, we're getting bin Laden. And that's like a quote from the head of the CIA. And so like she can make decisions in the moment.
Although I would just say, like, they got bin Laden, right. The idea that was a tough decision, I have a little trouble with, but whatever. And
let's say it failed, though. So let's play this out.
Would anybody really have criticized them for trying?
Yes, absolutely.
I don't think
so. I'd say, they sent our troops into harm's way. I don't
think so.
I don't have much.
You're talking about an 8-man SEAL team, and everybody understands how that works.
I don't have much faith in the polarized media to have grace for people with whom they disagree.
I agree with that. I agree with that.
So Robbie, with Jack's, I think it was 2 minutes and 3 seconds spiel on lies. Let me ask you: Has just plain and simple, has Hillary Clinton demonstrated herself to be trustworthy?
To me, yes, and that's why I defined it. So she's not forthcoming, but I feel she's trustworthy. I would trust her watching my kids. I would trust her with my car. I would trust her with my country. I would not trust Donald Trump to babysit my children, like literally, for 3 hours.
Right.
So if she says, I want to accomplish X, I believe she will go and try to accomplish that thing. And to me, like, the definition of trust is like will you try to do the things you say you'll try to do? And I believe that she will do that. I don't believe that Trump does that. He has a 30-year track record of going out of his way to break his word.
Yeah.
And if I like trustworthy of like, can I entrust a thing of value to you, my country, my kids, my car, whatever, I would trust her to be a custodian of things that have value like this country. And I think that she is clearly the only candidate for whom that is true of these two.
Now, how would you, so how do you process Benghazi? I think you've already addressed the email deal, but what about Benghazi?
I would quote Colin Powell, who was a 4-star general and commander of the Allied forces and a Republican Secretary of State, and say that it is, quote, Benghazi is a stupid witch hunt. And then Condi Rice replied in her email, I completely agree. I mean, it's a tragedy, no doubt about it. But there's a difference between a tragedy and a scandal. And so, like, I mean, Colin Powell himself said it's the Secretary of State's fault, it's the Department of State's fault, it's the embassy's fault, it's the intelligence community's fault. Like, the fact that the thing happened, that's a tragedy and a failure of the overall intelligence infrastructure, which she's of course a part of as Sec State, but she's not the only person involved. And the whole cover-up thing, I mean, I noticed that it was the video when it first came out, but intelligence is hard. I have a friend who works as a national security guy, and he's like, look, you try and knowing what's going on in a mob in the middle of Libya, halfway across the world, for 4 hours after something happens. And they fixed the record inside of 48 hours. So to me, it could have been better, sure, but like the fact that we're going to pick a president based on how we messaged our understanding of a thing that happened 10,000 miles away in a mob, I just don't think it's the seminal issue. And all these investigations have not found, again, like a smoking gun. It's just more, just piling on.
Well, I would agree with that, by the way. I mean, she clearly lied about it, but that's the kind of thing that you might feel like you need to lie about. In other words, if you're concerned that I think I know what happened here, but it could be really inflammatory to say so, and as Secretary of State, I got to be very careful of that. I'm going to put out a message that is less inflammatory or that serves other purposes. I mean, I'm not trying to say it was a good idea that she lied. I'm just saying it could be understandable that in certain circumstances she would not say what she knew,
Right.
what
and you're talking about the attribution of, like, we thought this is a mob incited by the video?
Yeah.
I think they just got it. I really think they got it wrong. And it's not a compliment to say you guys messed up your intelligence, right? I'm not like giving her some kind of kudos by being
but
wrong.
You're right. But intelligence is tough. I mean, well, it's kind of like the WMD thing. Bush lied. It's like, actually, no. I mean, everybody was wrong.
Yeah, and that's also why I think that when Trump campaigns on she voted for Iraq, it's like, do you recall what the intelligence she was given as a senator was on Iraq?
Yeah,
the senators should have voted yes, right? Given what they were told, they were given terrible intel, and some people lied. They're probably the folks we were asking questions to, right? They were not our own people, but like our sources clearly lied to us. And then that got hyped up, and that's a whole different discussion.
Well, I think the other thing that happens with that stuff, though, is the problem is that if you're the intel guy, you don't want to underestimate. You're better overestimating, and then things weren't as bad as you thought, than you were underestimating, and then there was a disaster. So, that's, I think, a big part of the WMD thing. And I like I said, I've got some experience with that whole.
Yeah, let's not relitigate the Iraq War.
Yeah, no, right. I mean, I know we're not talking about Iraq, but just, again, with the way that classified information works and what you know and what you don't and what the motives are of the people who are sharing information. And that's not to impute bad motives. It just says their incentive is exaggerate rather than underestimate.
Yeah.
So anyway.
How do you guys think that her husband, as a former president serving 2 terms, will play out in the end result of this campaign? I mean, does it have any relevance at all?
I don't think he matters. I think that he only matters as a surrogate to go speak at, college campuses and get the vote out. But I think that this is really about Hillary and Trump.
Yeah. Jack?
Yeah, well, I mean, does it matter 1%? Does it matter 3%? If it does, that might be enough to swing things, I mean, so there are certainly people who love Bill Clinton and for whom, him out there speaking as a surrogate is important. I tend to agree. I don't think certainly it doesn't seem like a driving issue, either pro or con.
All right, well, what I want to do is kind of give you guys a chance to look through your notes, because I don't want you to come away from this saying, "Oh, I wish I could have gotten to such and such." Are there any questions that I told you guys I would get to that I haven't? So kind of here's your last chance. Anything that you want to say or ask or challenge or anything? Jack, you get first.
Hey, actually, let me say something that kind of comforts me about Hillary Clinton, is that the Clintons don't believe in anything. They'll say or do anything for their own advantage, and all they want to be is successful. And that was actually why Bill Clinton, like despicable person though I think he is personally, was a decent president. I mean, he was fortunate to be president during a time when there wasn't international, that was a fairly safe time. And the next president is not going to have that luxury. But, I just think she wants to be successful. I mean, which you could say means that she might be inclined to be pragmatic. And I hope so.
Can I rebut that before I give kind of my final thing? So I've heard this before, this like Hillary doesn't stand for anything. And I tell you, man, like I just don't agree. And look at the history, right? So here's someone who quits the partner track at her career to go work for a civil rights nonprofit. Here's someone that, like look at Hillary Care in the 90s, right? It didn't work out. She steps up and says, I'm going to step in front of this buzzsaw of trying to get every person in the country health care. And she got pummeled for it. If you're willing to go up there and take those punches she's not going to get rich off of health insurance for kids or poor families. Like she's doing that because she believes in something. The same reason she got Children's Health Care Initiative passed and got disability access to schools. Like she does believe in helping those less fortunate than herself. And she's put herself directly in harm's way time and time again to achieve that. So the idea she doesn't care about anything, I just don't agree with that.
Well, let me just say real quick, I just looked up Hillary Clinton flip-flops, and there's like 22 recent Clinton flip-flops between the years 2006 and 2014. So I guess maybe that's where Jack's getting his ideas from. The fact that she doesn't really stand for anything. It's all about political expediency. I don't know.
You got to dig into those. Like, I mean, her policy on paid family leave, on foreign policy, taxation, college,
let's
whatever.
talk about how about the Trans-Pacific Partnership?
Sure. Yeah, that's when she's changed. And because the overwhelming majority of her party said, we disagree with you, and she listened to her constituents.
In other words, she's got her finger to the wind, and she's going to go whichever way it blows. That's my point. And, again, I understand your point, too, that, and I would say that I would stand corrected to argue that she doesn't believe in anything is a bit of an overstatement. But I think in terms of the important things that a president actually does, I would actually think that Mike could defend my remark pretty well.
And Jack, I'm certainly not trying to trap you here. In the last 30 years, who were some presidents that did not do that? Like they did not give a rip about what public opinion was.
First of all, I'm not saying don't give a rip. I mean, because there's a balance. You've got to have principles, but you got to be wise about how you apply them.
Yeah.
Like, your comment about Lincoln's greatness, Robbie, was, I agree with that. And Lincoln was the master of that, of being a very principled person whose realm was politics, which meant that he had to listen and which meant that he had to compromise, sometimes with people that he despised. So I don't think it's a matter of, because the person who doesn't listen is just stubborn. And you better hope you're never wrong. And who can live to that standard,
But even then, like I think you ask folks to work with her, number one trait of Hillary Clinton is she's a listener. That's why her senator cohort who were across the line or across the aisle liked her. I mean, contrast that to Donald Trump, who doesn't even.
Dude.
I mean, that's where like the relevance of Trump versus Clinton comes in. Like, I mean, this woman is a listener, and this man listens to himself and only himself, right?
I'd agree with that.
Yeah,
He's even said, like, I don't have experts. I am my own advisor, which is just like terrifying to me.
A supreme egotist, no question.
Yeah. Okay. Should I do my thing now, or Jack, want to go some more?
Go ahead.
Okay, so I heard the Trump podcast, and I'm guessing this comes up a lot whenever you guys breach politics. And you said, one of you guys said, like, how do I even know what to believe? The media is all biased in one way or the other. And I understand that point of view, and not everyone can do what I do and read 50 things every single day and sort of sort out the truth from the garbage. But with this election, the thing that I find most compelling more than anything is the fact that for the first time in basically a century, you have a substantial portion of one party, elected officials saying, vote for that person, right? You have four sitting Congress people, two sitting senators of the Republican Party saying, you should not support our own guy, Donald Trump. You've got Reagan's national security guy, Bush's Secretary of Treasury, former World Bank president. And last week, the Dallas Morning News, which for 76 years has endorsed Republicans consecutively, said there is, quote, only one serious candidate on the ballot this November. And they don't like her. They've hammered her in the past, but they say, look, if you view it as a two-person choice, and I know that Jack doesn't view it that way, there is only one candidate here that works, who I trust to actually sit in that building and not bring the whole house of cards down. And that's Hillary Clinton. And I think she'll actually do a good job. But even if you're just trying to keep the Republic from falling upon itself or trying to keep Europe from going to war, and that's your bare minimum standard, there's even then only one person who I think is on the ballot who we should vote for this November.
So I do want to follow that up. Was she your front runner out of all the Democrats? Like, I definitely get your point that she's a more ideal candidate than Trump, but would you say she is an ideal candidate just in general?
Well, I don't think there's any ideal candidate this year. If I were to build my candidate in the lab this year, it'd be some combination of Bernie, Hillary, and Kasich, frankly. Gotcha. There are certain things Bernie did that I like that are kind of out there, like sort of like hardcore economist ideas on policy. I think that she would still have been my choice for foreign affairs. And like the more we watch Russia try to play in our election and try to mess up Eastern Europe, and just last week it was announced that the Russian Reserve Fund, the fund they use to pay their bills when the oil money doesn't come in as expected, is going to run out in the next 6 months. So I actually believe that the next president will have to be a foreign policy president. And we'll have to improve at home too, but like in general, the growth is slow and steady, and it's going to be more or less on the path that it's already on, I think. I don't think either candidate will change that very much. So, you know, as far as if I was building my laboratory candidate, like she would have been my foreign policy person. And to me, that's the seminal challenge of the next 4 years, most likely.
Yeah. So are you optimistic, Robbie?
That she'll win?
Yeah.
A week ago, I was feeling a lot better. I am because of two things. I think that right now there are a lot of undecideds, and my suspicion is that a lot of those undecideds are people who are somewhat like me, who may have a bit of conservative bend, a bit of progressive bend, and they might say, you know, in any normal year, I would vote conservative. I'd vote for the person the Dallas Morning News would recommend. But I know that I can't vote for Trump. I have a moral obligation to doing so to keep this country from falling upon itself. But I can't really say out loud that I'm voting for Hillary yet. So my hope, my prayer, frankly, is that the late-breaking voters will break overwhelmingly for her, for the candidate of sanity. And I also believe, like, to get into the sort of like blocking and tackling, that her ground game will be better and stuff like that. But my worry is that a lot of liberals think it's so impossible that Trump could win because he strikes them as so absurd that they might not show up to vote. And so as long as Hillary gets her voters out there, I think she wins. I don't know who she will or who Trump will get to vote for him that did vote for Obama. So as long as the Obama coalition votes for Hillary, she'll win. But to be honest, I don't want her just to win. I want him to crush him because I don't want to see this ugly, racist, isolationist, or divisive rhetoric come by anytime soon. So I want him to lose handily so that we can have real conservatives with real ideas come back.
Jack, you have any predictions at this point?
I really don't.
Late in the game?
I really don't. I mean, you know, part of it is like both of them. I mean, you know, Robbie, I just like I think she's a very weak campaigner, and she has a penchant for shooting herself in the foot. You know, Trump is just, you know, who knows what idiotic thing he'll say tomorrow, and you know, that's kind of her hope is that every time every time a thinking person starts to think like maybe he wouldn't be too bad, he proves that he really would be. So
yeah, there's no evidence he'll ever change.
I just think, you know, it's like who's going to make the most mistakes in the next couple of months? Boy, they're competing really heavily on that one.
Yeah, and I think it's fair. I actually wrote my notes like this. She's not a great campaigner, but I think she'll be a much better at governance than she was as a campaigner. And I just hope that Americans say, all right, she wasn't the best showman. I mean, Trump is an elite showman. That is objectively true, right? But we're not picking a reality show candidate or picking someone to sit in the boring meeting for 20 hours and grind through budget policy. or knock out a treaty with Iran. And I can only imagine one candidate around the table doing that, and I hope that most Americans agree.
Well, Jared, it has been my pleasure to serve with you as a fine American citizen, because here's what's going to happen. The Pastor with No Answers listeners are going to go out, and they're going to change the course of history. And you heard Carrie and Jack on episode 40, and you have heard Robbie and Jack on this Clinton episode. So Americans, you're going to make the call, and whatever call you make is going to change the course of history. So Godspeed.
That much is clear.
Right.